July 28th, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Two people woke up that morning who would never forget it. Sergeant Orville, 42 years old, commander of Camp Ruston, rose at 5 o'clock as he had every morning for the past 11 months. He dressed in the dark the way soldiers learn to dress when light becomes a luxury. He stood in front of the small mirror above his wash basin and looked at his reflection for exactly 3 seconds, which was as long as he allowed himself. The man looking back at him was someone he recognized less and less. He walked to his desk, opened the administrative ledger, and found the line he had signed the previous afternoon. Ice cream distribution, Block B, Thursday. 37 female prisoners of war. He had signed it without reading it, twice the way he signed everything because the Geneva Convention did not ask him how he felt about it. Across the compound in the wooden barracks of Block B, Bet Webb was already awake. She was 24 years old, a radio operator from Cologne University, educated, captured near the Rhine in April of that year during the final collapse of everything she had known. She had been processed through camps in France, loaded onto a transport ship with 60 other women, and delivered to a country so vast it made Germany feel like a room. Camp Ruston sat in the pine forests of northern Louisiana, surrounded by humidity so thick the air itself seemed to have weight. She had been here for 91 days. She counted them. She lay on her bunk for a moment before rising, staring at the wooden planks above her. Somewhere outside, a bird was calling a sound she did not recognize, some American bird with a language she had not learned. She got up, straightened her clothing, and prepared for another day of laundering American uniforms in the brutal summer heat. She did not know that before noon, something small and pink and impossibly cold would break something inside her that she would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. The morning passed the way mornings always passed at Camp Ruston. The women of Block B moved through their assigned labor with the careful efficiency of people who had learned that routine was a form of armor. Beatty worked the laundry line, her hands moving through the motions while her mind went somewhere quieter. She had trained herself to do this, to send the thinking part of herself somewhere else while her body handled the mechanical work of surviving. Erna Brower worked beside her. Erna was 19 years old, from Hamburg, a telephone operator before the war swallowed everything. She was the youngest woman in Block B, and she carried that youth like something slightly dangerous, a brightness that the others sometimes resented and sometimes depended on without admitting it. Erna hummed without realizing she was humming small fragments of melodies without names. Marta Vogel worked on the other side of the compound, repairing a section of fencing under Corporal Helen Davis's supervision. Marta was a practical woman from Bavaria who had driven supply trucks for the Wehrmacht and who approached every task, including captivity, with the same methodical competence she had applied to navigating roads in the dark. She spoke rarely and observed constantly. And Trudy Stearns stood near the barracks wall with her arms folded, watching all of them. Trudy was 55 years old, a former administrative officer for military logistics. She was the oldest woman in Block B, and she carried her age like a rank something that entitled her to opinions expressed as facts. She had served the Reich not out of fanaticism, but out of the deep German conviction that order was a moral virtue, that structure and hierarchy were the foundations on which civilization stood. She had watched that civilization collapse, and she had drawn a simple conclusion: the collapse was the fault of failure, not of the thing that had failed. If Germany had been stronger, more disciplined, more willing to sacrifice, the outcome would have been different. She held this belief the way a person holds onto a railing on a ship that is already underwater. Her eyes moved across the compound with the careful attention of someone cataloging threats. It was just before 11 o'clock when the sound came. Bet heard it before she saw anything. A musical tinkling metal against metal, something chiming at irregular intervals. She looked up from the laundry line with a wet shirt still in her hands, water dripping from the fabric onto her boots. She did not notice the water. Private Cliftons, 22 years old, from a small town in Ohio, pushed the white cart through the compound gate, whistling. He was broad-shouldered and sunburned with the easy physical confidence of someone who had grown up with enough to eat. The cart was white and gleaming in the Louisiana sun. Cold vapor rose from its surface. In the heat of that July morning, whatever was inside the cart was cold enough to make the air around it visible. Clifton pushed the cart to the center of the yard and called out in the broken German he had been practicing for 3 weeks. "Dessert? Who wants dessert?" 37 women stopped moving. Not gradually, not one by one. All of them simultaneously, as if a sound had been cut. The compound went quiet except for the buzzing of insects and the distant cry of that unrecognizable bird. Clifton looked around at the motionless women with the expression of a man who had expected a different kind of reaction. He glanced at Corporal Davis, who was standing 10 feet away. Davis looked back at him without expression. She was watching the women. Clifton opened the lid of the cart. More cold vapor poured out, rolling down the sides and dissolving into the heat. He reached inside with a metal scoop and lifted it out. The color was wrong. That was Betta's first thought. The color was wrong for this place, wrong for this year, wrong for everything that had been true since 1942. The ice cream on the scoop was pink, not pale, not faded, a bright, almost violent pink, the color of something from before the war, from a world that had closed its doors and stopped accepting visitors years ago. Erna took a step forward, then stopped. Her voice came out as barely a sound at all. "Is this real?" Clifton laughed. It was a genuine laugh, unguarded, slightly confused by the question. "Real as it gets. Come on, it's melting." Erna walked forward the way a person approaches something that might be dangerous. She accepted the small bowl from Clifton's hands. She held it with both hands the way you hold something valuable or fragile or alive. She lifted the spoon. Betta watched her do it. She watched Erna open her mouth, watched the pink spoon disappear, watched Erna's eyes go wide, and then she watched something break. Erna made a sound that was not a gasp and not a sob, but something that lived between those two things. The spoon clattered against the bowl. Her free hand flew to her mouth. Tears began running down her face, sudden and fast, as if a pressure had been released that had been building for a very long time. "Cold," Erna whispered. "It's so cold." Then she was crying, really crying the way a person cries when they have stopped caring whether anyone is watching. Her shoulders shook. The ice cream melted in her hand. Clifton looked at Corporal Davis with something close to alarm. "Did I do something wrong? Did I?" he started, and then did not finish the sentence. Bet stepped forward. She was not aware of making the decision to do it. Her legs moved and the rest of her followed. "I'll have some." Her own voice sounded like someone else's voice. Clifton handed her a bowl. Strawberry and vanilla swirled together, already going soft at the edges, a drop falling from the scoop and landing on her wrist. The cold was the first thing. Shockingly, almost painfully cold a cold she had forgotten existed in the middle of this Louisiana summer. Then the sweetness hit. Real sugar. Not saccharin, not the chemical substitutes that had been passed off as sweetness for 3 years. Sugar that was actually sugar that arrived on her tongue with an intensity that was almost too much to process. Then the flavor came. Strawberry. Bright and slightly artificial, and also, underneath all of that, deeply and completely and perfectly strawberry. A flavor she had not tasted since before the war and had not even known she was missing until the exact moment it returned. She closed her eyes. The ice cream melted immediately in her mouth, going from cold to liquid to sweetness to memory before she could stop it. Her mother's kitchen in Cologne. A summer Sunday 3 years before the war. Fresh strawberries in a white ceramic bowl. Cream so thick it moved slowly. Her brother Frederick, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, 17 years old, eating too fast cream on his upper lip that he refused to wipe off because it made their mother laugh. Frederick had died on the Eastern Front in 1944. He was 20 years old. Bet opened her eyes. The ice cream in her bowl was melting fast, the pink and white bleeding together into something that was becoming liquid. She took another spoonful. She did not cry. But something had shifted. Something had moved in a direction she could not identify, and she understood with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the temperature of the dessert that she would be thinking about this moment for a very long time. She looked at Clifton, who was watching her with the bewildered expression of someone who has stumbled into an event he does not have the context to understand. She said what she had been thinking since the moment she stepped forward, what she had been almost thinking since the morning she arrived at Camp Ruston and found real coffee and white bread waiting for her in the mess hall. "No, you did something kind, that's the problem." Clifton looked at her. He clearly did not understand. How could he? "I don't," he started. "I know," Beatty said, and she turned back to her bowl. From the window of his office at the far end of the compound, Sergeant Orville watched. He had been standing in there since the cart appeared coffee cup in hand, watching the 37 women of Block B encounter what his supply requisition form had described as seasonal morale provisions standard issue. He had approved the form. He had not expected to be standing at his window watching it happen. He watched Erna cry and recover and cry again. He watched Marta Vogel take her bowl, sit down on the ground without ceremony, and eat with the focused determination of a person completing an important task. He watched Trudy Stearns stand apart from all of it, arms folded, eyes moving between the cart and the women eating, never going toward it, never fully looking away. He opened his administrative journal and wrote July 28th, ice cream distribution. Block B, prisoner response unexpected, note for follow-up. He stared at what he had written for a moment. Then he closed the journal without adding anything else. The ice cream was almost finished. Most of the women had come forward, some twice, some 3 times. Erna had stopped crying and was sitting on the barrack steps eating slowly now, the bowl cradled in both hands. Marta had received a third serving and was scraping every trace from the bowl with methodical thoroughness. Several women who had eaten nothing were standing near the others, not speaking, watching the cart with expressions Bet could not fully read. Trudy had not moved. She stood where she had been standing since the cart appeared, arms still folded, spine straight, her face set in the expression of someone who has made a decision and is honoring it. But her eyes kept returning to the cart. Bet noticed this. She noticed it the way you notice things about people who are performing an emotion they do not entirely feel. That evening, after the cart had been wheeled away and the women had returned to their routines, Trudy's composure cracked along a different line than anyone had expected. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply said in a flat voice that cut through the low conversations of the barracks, "My children in Berlin are eating potato peels right now if they are lucky, and today I watched you eat strawberry ice cream as if it were nothing." The barracks went quiet. No one responded. The truth sat in the room with them, like a presence that had not been invited but could not be removed. They were eating better as prisoners of war than their families were eating as free citizens of a defeated country. Betty lay on her bunk that night and listened to the sounds of the camp settling into darkness. She could hear Erna's breathing nearby, still slightly uneven, still carrying the weight of the afternoon. She could hear the distant sound of American soldiers somewhere outside talking and laughing about something she could not make out. She picked up her diary and uncapped her pen. July 28th, 1945. They gave us ice cream today, strawberry and vanilla. I don't know how to explain what happened. Erna cried so hard she got hiccups. Marta ate 3 bowls and couldn't speak for an hour. Even I. She stopped. What had happened to her exactly? The ice cream had been cold and sweet and perfect. She had thought of Frederick. She had not cried. And yet something had happened that she could not name, something that had to do not with the taste of the ice cream, but with the fact of it, with the casualness of it, with the ordinariness of a soldier pushing a white cart across a compound on a Thursday morning, because the Geneva Convention entitled prisoners to morale provisions, and it happened to be hot outside. She put down her pen and looked at the ceiling. The war had been over for 3 months. She had spent the first month of captivity expecting punishment. She had expected it in France, and she had expected it on the ship, and she had expected it at Camp Rustin. Not because she believed the Americans were monsters, but because she had been told they were repeatedly and with great confidence, and because she had no framework for the alternative. The food had surprised her, the space had surprised her, the correctness of the treatment, the mechanical precision with which the rules were followed had surprised her more than anything. But the ice cream was different from all of those things. The food could be explained as pragmatism, the rules as legal obligation. The ice cream was not obligatory. The ice cream was simply given the way you give something to a person when you have enough and you see that they do not. She did not finish the thought that night. She was not ready to finish it, but something had started. The following week, Sergeant Orville called Bet into his office. She had been told by Corporal Davis simply that the camp commander wanted to speak with her, and she had spent the walk across the compound cataloging reasons why this might be true, and finding none of them reassuring. Orville's office was small and hot, a wooden desk covered with the organized disorder of administrative work, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the eastern section of the compound. Orville was already standing when she entered. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had probably been younger looking before the war and was now precisely as old as it was. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You speak English well," he said. It was not a question. "I studied at Heidelberg," Bet said. "I know, your file is thorough." He sat. "I want to ask you something directly, Miss Webb. We have a number of technical documents relating to communication equipment that we would find useful to have translated. I wonder if you would be willing to assist with that." Bet looked at him steadily. Would that be a violation of the Geneva Convention? A pause. Not long, but complete. Orville's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to categorize. It was not offense, and it was not amusement, and it was something that contained elements of both. "Yes," he said, "it would be key. I wanted to see if you knew that." Bet said nothing. "You can go, Miss Webb." She stood. She walked to the door. And then, because something in the exchange had opened a door she had not expected, she stopped without turning around. "Sergeant, why does it matter to you whether we know our rights?" The question hung in the room. Orville was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was level in the way that voices are level when they are carrying something heavy and have learned to carry it without letting it show. "Because I once didn't know mine," he said, "and no one told me." He did not explain further. Bet did not ask. She walked back across the compound in the Louisiana heat with a feeling she could not quite identify, something between unease and a strange, unwelcome respect. And she turned the exchange over in her mind for the rest of the day without arriving anywhere she recognized. That night, she wrote in her diary again, The camp commander knows the rules better than we do. He wanted to see if I knew them too. I was taught that the answer to the question of why they treat us this way was weakness or deception. I'm starting to think the answer might be something else entirely, and I don't know yet what that means for everything I believed before I got here. She capped her pen. Outside, the Louisiana night was loud with insects and heat. Somewhere in Ohio, a young soldier named Clifton was writing his own notes in a small notebook, trying to understand why 37 women had cried over ice cream. Somewhere in this same camp, an older soldier named Orville was sitting at his desk in the dark, not sleeping, thinking about a boy named James who was somewhere in the Pacific, and hoping that whoever held power over his son's life was the kind of man who signed forms without asking how he felt about them. None of them knew yet what the summer would teach them, but it had begun. 3 days later, the cart came back. This time, Clifton had a small notebook in his breast pocket. Bade noticed it immediately, the way you notice something that does not belong, a detail slightly out of place in a familiar scene. He pushed the cart through the gate with the same easy stride, the same sunburned calm, but his eyes were moving differently than they had on Thursday. He was watching. Not the way a guard watches measuring threat and distance, the way a person watches when they are trying to understand something they cannot explain. The flavors were different. Chocolate vanilla and something Clifton announced in his broken German as butter pecan, a combination of words that meant nothing to any of the women and prompted a moment of collective confusion before he held up a spoonful to demonstrate. Erna came forward first this time without hesitation, without the tentative approach of 3 days ago. She chose vanilla and took her bowl to the corner of the steps where she had sat before. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and ate slowly with a concentration that looked almost like prayer. Marta took chocolate, sat on the same patch of ground she had claimed before, and ate with the same systematic thoroughness. When she finished the first bowl, she stood up, walked back to Clifton without a word, and held out her bowl again. He refilled it without comment. Bet chose chocolate. The color alone was something, dark and rich, almost black, in the depth of its brown, nothing like the waxy substance that had been called chocolate in Germany during the final years of the war. This was the actual thing. She took the first bite and it coated her tongue completely cold and sweet and faintly bitter, all at once, a flavor with actual complexity, and she stood in the narrow strip of shade beside the barracks and ate it without thinking about Frederick or Cologne or anything else. She simply tasted it, that she realized was its own kind of progress. Trudy did not approach the cart. Clifton finished serving the last of the women and stood for a moment cleaning the scoop against the edge of the cart. Then he looked at Bet, who was still standing in her strip of shade with an empty bowl. Miss Webb. He said her name carefully, the way people say names they have looked up rather than heard. On Thursday, you said something to me. You said I did something kind, and that was the problem. He paused. I've been thinking about that for 3 days, and I still don't understand it. Bet looked at him. He was 22 years old, and he was asking an honest question, and she decided for a reason she could not have fully articulated to give him an honest answer. Do you have brothers or sisters? She asked. One brother, Danny. He's in the Pacific. Something moved across his face when he said it quick and controlled the expression of someone who has learned to mention a frightening thing without dwelling on it. If one day you found out that everything you had been taught about the world was wrong, Betty said, and the first proof of that was a spoonful of chocolate ice cream, would you cry or wouldn't you? Clifton was quiet for a long moment. A fly landed on the rim of the empty cart, and he watched it without moving. I think I'd need to sit with that for a while, he said. Yes, Bet said, that's what we're doing. He took out his small notebook and wrote something in it as she walked away. That evening, Clifton brought the notebook to Orville's office and left it on the desk without being asked. Orville found it when he returned from the evening inspection. He sat down, poured himself a glass of water, and opened it. The entries were brief, factual in the way that only someone without the vocabulary for what they are observing can be factual. Erna B. Vanilla. No crying this time, eyes closed very still. Marta V. Chocolate, 2 bowls again, same spot on the ground. Betty W. Chocolate stood alone. Trudy S. did not approach. Then at the bottom of the page, Clifton had written a line that was not an observation but a question. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? Orville read that line twice. Then he turned to the previous page and found the entry from Thursday. Bet W. did not cry, but eyes looking at something that wasn't there. Said you did something kind, that's the problem. He closed the notebook. He sat for a long time in the heat of his office with the window open and the Louisiana night coming in carrying the smell of pine and red clay. He thought about Argonne Forest in 1918, which he did not allow himself to think about often because it cost him sleep. He thought about a German prisoner who could not have been older than 18, sitting in the mud of a captured trench with his hands behind his head. He thought about the soldier beside him, a man named Walter Briggs from Pennsylvania, who had reached into his coat and produced a bar of chocolate and handed it to the prisoner without a word. The prisoner had taken it, had looked at it for a moment as if it might be a trap, then had eaten it and had cried in the specific way that people cry when they have been frightened for so long that the first moment of safety is indistinguishable from grief. Orville had been 17 years old and he had not understood it. He was 42 now, and he picked up his administrative journal and wrote, "Continue weekly ice cream distribution, Block B, standard provisions." He did not write anything else. The following morning, he called Clifton into his office. Clifton came in straight-backed and prepared the posture of a young soldier who has been called to see a superior and does not know why. Orville gestured to the chair, and Clifton sat. "I read your notebook," Orville said. Clifton said nothing. He was waiting to find out whether this was a problem. "You've been documenting the prisoner's responses to the provisions." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Clifton met his eyes. "Because I don't understand what I'm seeing, sir. And I was told that when you don't understand something, you write it down until you do." Orville was quiet for a moment. "You know what some of those women did, Clifton? What they were part of." "Yes, sir, I know. And you're still curious about them." "Danny's in the Pacific, sir." Clifton said it the same way he had said it to Bet, with that same quick, controlled flinch. "I don't know what's happening to him over there. I don't know if anyone is curious about him. I think I'm writing it down because I want someone to be." The office was very quiet. Outside, the morning work details were assembling the sounds of the camp, organizing itself into another day. Orville looked at the young man across from him for a long moment. He thought about what he was about to say and chose it carefully. "I lost my brother at the Argonne," he said. 1918. He was 19. He paused. "I know what it is to wait for information that doesn't come." Clifton did not speak. "Keep your notebook," Orville said, "but keep it in your pocket, not on my desk." Clifton stood, nodded once, and left. Orville watched the door close and then turned to his window. The question at the bottom of Clifton's notebook page stayed with him. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? He had been thinking about the answer for days, turning it over, approaching it from different directions. He thought he was beginning to understand it. He was not sure he was comfortable with it. August passed. The ice cream cart appeared twice more. The women of Block B developed preferences, debated them, and in doing so began almost without noticing to become something other than a collective. They became individuals with opinions about dessert, which is a small thing and also not a small thing at all. One afternoon in late August, a group of women gathered under the shade of the equipment shed. Gertrude Mann, a former secretary from Stuttgart, who had arrived at Camp Ruston 3 weeks after Bet, and who formed strong opinions quickly, was making the case for butter pecan with the conviction of someone arguing a legal position. "The nuts change the experience entirely," she said. "Without them, it's just sweetness. With them, it becomes interesting." "Vanilla is honest," Erna said from her spot on the ground, her back against the shed wall. "You can taste everything. Nothing is hidden." "Chocolate is the only serious choice," Marta said. This was not a contribution to the debate so much as a ruling. Corporal Davis was standing nearby, officially supervising the recreation period, unofficially listening. She said without looking up from the clipboard she was pretending to consult, "The point of butter pecan is the texture. That's what makes it worth arguing about." The conversation continued, specific and genuine, the way conversations about small pleasures become genuine when the people having them have gone without pleasure long enough. Betta sat slightly apart from the others, listening, feeling the cognitive distance between what the scene looked like and what it meant. Women who had served the apparatus of the Third Reich discussing ice cream flavors with an American military guard, as if the category of enemy had temporarily ceased to apply. She was thinking about this when Trudy appeared at the edge of the group. Trudy had been moving at a distance from the others for weeks present, but separated like a ship that has not decided whether to come into port. She stood now with her arms folded in the posture Bet had come to recognize as her armor, and she looked at the women sitting in the shade with an expression that had shifted since July. It was no longer purely contempt. There was something else in it now, something raw. "You should be ashamed," Trudy said. Her voice was level and it carried. The conversation stopped. "Sitting here discussing ice cream preferences as if you are at a cafe in peacetime, while German children starve, while our cities are rubble, while everything we sacrifice turns to ash." Erna's face went pale. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Marta set down the small pebble she had been turning over in her fingers. She stood up slowly, and she was shorter than Trude by several inches, but something in the way she stood made that irrelevant. "What would you have us do?" she said. It was not a question the way she said it. "Preserve some dignity, refuse to participate in their comfort rituals. Show them that we cannot be bought. Bought? Marta let the words sit for a moment. You think strawberry ice cream is the price of our dignity. I think accepting gifts from captors is the beginning of something. The beginning of what? Seeing clearly. Marta's voice did not rise, which somehow made it more effective. We lost Trudy. Completely. Without qualification. The question is what we're going to do now that we're standing in the ash. Trudy's face went rigid. You are a traitor to everything we built. What we built is ash, Marta said. You said so yourself. Trudy turned and walked away without responding. Spine straight, refusing to give any part of herself to the argument. Bet watched her go and felt something that surprised her. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Something that felt much more like grief. Trudy was holding on to the certainty of the old world because releasing it meant facing something too large to confront, not just defeat. The possibility that the defeat was deserved. Bet did not feel superior to her. She felt instead that she was looking at herself 3 months earlier, standing at the edge of a truth she had not yet been ready to enter. That night, she lay in her bunk and could not sleep. She had been in this country for 4 months. She had not received a single letter from home. She had no way of knowing whether her mother was alive, whether the apartment building on Lindenstrasse was still standing, whether the city she had grown up in retained any of the shapes she remembered. She had been fed well and treated correctly and given ice cream twice a week, and none of those things answered the questions that woke her up at 2 a.m. and sat on her chest until dawn. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. It came through Red Cross channels, thin and slightly damaged at one corner. Her mother's handwriting on the outside in ink that had run slightly. Betty took it from Davis's hands and carried it to her bunk and sat with it for a full minute before opening it. The letter described Berlin in the autumn of 1945. Her mother wrote carefully, choosing words the way a person chooses footing on ice, testing each one before committing weight to it. The city had changed. There had been difficulties with food distribution. The building on Lindenstrasse had lost 2 of its upper floors, but the ground and first levels were intact and livable. Several neighbors had not returned. Her mother was managing. She and an older woman from the 4th floor had developed a system for sharing resources. At the very end, in smaller writing than the rest, as if it had been added after the letter was already finished, I hope you are being treated well. I hope you have enough to eat. I worry about you without stopping. Bet sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She thought about chocolate ice cream. She thought about the mess hall dinner she had eaten 4 hours ago. She thought about Marta eating 3 bowls and scraping the remainder with a spoon, and about her mother developing systems for sharing resources with a neighbor, which was language for hunger, and about the 5 months it had taken a letter to travel from Berlin to Louisiana. She took out her diary and her pen. She wrote, I received a letter from home today. Mama is alive. The apartment is partially standing. She writes carefully the way you write when the truth is too heavy to put down directly. She hopes I have enough to eat. She stopped writing. She thought about what she could put in her reply. She had enough. She had considerably more than enough. She could not write that. The distance between her mother's reality and her own had no road through it. She wrote, I am well. The Americans follow the rules. I have enough to eat. She sealed the letter. Every word of it was true. None of it was sufficient. 2 days later, Orville received his own piece of paper. Davis brought it to him during the afternoon inspection. A telegram which meant it had not waited for the slow channels. Orville took it, read it again, and folded it in half along the existing crease. He put it in the inner pocket of his jacket against his chest. He completed the rest of the afternoon inspection without changing his expression or his pace. That evening, he sat at his desk and took the telegram out and unfolded it and looked at it again as if it might have changed. It had not. James Orville, Private First Class, United States Marine Corps, killed in action. Okinawa, June 1945. The notification had taken 4 months to reach him. He sat with this for a long time. Outside, the camp went through its evening routines, the sounds of men and women moving through the ordinary business of surviving another day. He could hear voices from the direction of Block B, low and indistinct. He opened his administrative journal, found the page for the following week's supply requisitions, signed the line for ice cream distribution Block B without pausing. He closed the journal. Davis knocked and entered without waiting, which was the custom between them after 11 months. She looked at him and understood immediately the way people understand things they have been dreading. She said nothing. Geneva Convention doesn't have a provision for personal bereavement, Corporal, Orville said. No, sir. Good. Then there's nothing to discuss. Davis stood for a moment longer, then nodded and left. Orville turned to his window. Block B was quiet now, the barracks lights visible in the Louisiana dusk. 37 women in there, each one carrying her own version of the weight he was carrying tonight. He thought about the question Clifton had written in his notebook. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? He had been turning it over for weeks. Now sitting with the telegram in his jacket pocket, The answer came to him fully formed, and it was not comfortable. It was the kind of answer that changed the shape of things you thought you understood. Clifton did not learn about James until the following morning from Davis. He stood very still when she told him. He looked toward Orville's office for a long moment. Then he looked toward Block B. He took out his notebook and wrote one line. Sergeant Orville lost his son. He signed the ice cream order this morning. He put the notebook away and did not take it out again that day. He did not know that Bet had seen him from across the compound standing with that stillness looking between the office and the barracks. He did not know that she had recognized the particular quality of that stillness because she had worn it herself on the day she learned about Frederick. She did not go to him. There was nothing yet to say. But that night, for the first time, she found herself thinking not about what the Americans had taken from her and not about what they had given her, but about what it had cost them to give it. And that thought, quiet and unexpected, changed something in the way she understood what she was living through. She did not write it in her diary. Some things are too new to put into words. But it was there, settled somewhere below language patient, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to look at it directly. That moment was coming. She did not yet know how soon. November came to Camp Ruston the way November comes to Louisiana. Not with cold, but with a slight softening of the heat, a change in the quality of the light that suggested the world was considering the possibility of autumn without committing to it. The pine forests around the camp shifted imperceptibly. The humidity loosened its grip by a fraction. In the evenings, it was almost bearable to sit outside. Bet was sitting outside when Trudy came and sat beside her. This had not happened before. In 4 months, they had occupied the same spaces, eaten at the same tables, worked in the same compound, and maintained between them the careful distance of people who have chosen different responses to the same catastrophe. Betty looked at the older woman settling onto the bench beside her and said nothing, because nothing seemed to be required yet. Trudy was quiet for a long time. She was looking at the fence line, at the pine trees visible beyond it, dark shapes against the fading sky. You believe that understanding the truth will make you feel better, Trudy said finally. It was not a question. It was the observation of someone who has been watching and has reached a conclusion. Betty considered this carefully. I think I believe that it's necessary, she said. Whether it makes anything better is a different question. I know the truth now, Trudy said. I have known it for 4 weeks, since the letter from my daughter. She paused. It does not make me feel better. It makes my husband's death meaningless. The words landed without dramatics, which made them heavier. Trudy's husband had died on the Western Front in 1943. Bade had not known this until this moment. My brother's name was Frederick, Bet said. She had not planned to say it. Eastern Front, 1944. He was 20 years old. Trudy turned and looked at her. It was the first time in 4 months that the older woman had looked at her as a person rather than as a representative of a position. The truth doesn't make Frederick's death meaningful, Bet continued. Her voice was level because she needed it to be level. It makes it worse. He died for a lie. That is not comfort. It is the specific kind of pain that has no bottom to it. They sat together in the Louisiana dusk, 2 women from the same country, carrying the same unbearable weight from opposite directions, and the silence between them was different from any silence they had shared before. It was not the silence of opposition. It was the silence of people who have arrived at the same wreckage by different roads. Then why do you continue, Trudy asked. Why do you keep choosing to see it clearly if it costs this much? Bet thought about this for a longer moment than she had expected to need. Because I cannot unknow it, she said at last. I tried in the beginning. You cannot put it back. So the only direction is forward, even if forward is harder. Trude said nothing, but she did not stand up and leave, which was its own kind of answer. They sat there until the bell rang for evening count, and then they walked back to the barracks separately the way they had always done. But something had moved between them, some significant and unnamed thing, and both of them knew it. January arrived with a particular cruelty. The mail came on a Tuesday, sorted and distributed by Davis in the barracks common area. Trude received a letter from her daughter in Berlin. Bate watched her take it, watched her turn away to face the wall, the way people face walls when they need a moment of privacy in a place where privacy does not exist. She stood there for a long time. When she turned back, the letter was folded in her hand, and her face had the quality of someone who has been somewhere in return changed. The next morning, the ice cream cart appeared in the compound. Clifton pushed it through the gate at the usual time. Chocolate vanilla, a new flavor he called peppermint chip. The women came forward in the established pattern, Erna first, then Marta, then Gertrude, and the others. Trudy walked to the back of the line. She stood there with her arms at her sides, not folded. She moved forward as the line moved. When she reached Clifton, she said nothing. Pointed briefly at the vanilla and accepted the small bowl he gave her. She walked to the far end of the barrack steps away from the other women and sat down. She closed her eyes. She ate the entire bowl with her eyes closed. When she finished, she held the empty bowl in her lap and did not move for a long time. Bet did not approach her. Some things need their space. That evening, without announcement or explanation, Trudy walked across the barracks to where Erna was sitting and sat down beside her. Erna looked up. Trudy did not apologize for the grab collar back in France for the accusations. She did not use the word sorry. She simply sat offering presents as a form of speech. Erna looked at her for a moment and then looked away and then slowly did not move away. They sat together for the better part of an hour. Whatever had been broken between them was not repaired in that hour. But something was acknowledged, and acknowledgement Bet was learning was often the only honest beginning. Orville called Bet to his office for the second time in mid-January. She crossed the compound in the thin winter light and noticed that the camp felt different in January than it had in July, not in its structures but in its texture, as if the long months had worn something into the air itself. She knocked on the open door, and he looked up from his desk. Clifton's notebook was on the desk between them. "Sit down, Miss Webb." She sat. He did not make her wait once. The cold that no longer shocked her, but still comforted her. The sweetness that no longer overwhelmed, but simply satisfied. The memory of Frederick, which would always be there, which she no longer tried to keep away. The face of her mother in the kitchen on Lindenstrasse. The conversation in Orville's office. Around her, the women of Block B ate their final American ice cream in a quiet that was not emptiness, but fullness. Marta ate butter pecan with the considered attention of someone taking careful inventory. Erna stood with her vanilla in her closed eyes. The tears this time slow and deliberate rather than sudden, a different kind of crying entirely. Gertrude ate chocolate and did not debate the point with anyone. Trudy stood in the line. She took her bowl without a word, chocolate this time, and ate it standing apart from the others in her habitual position, but the distance was different now. It was no longer the distance of refusal. It was the distance of someone who still needs a little more room than others. She finished the bowl and held it in both hands for a moment looking at it. From his office window, Orville watched. Clifton came to stand beside Bet when she had almost finished. He looked out at the assembled women in the compound, all of them in this strange suspension between what had been and what was coming. "It looks different from July," he said. "We are different from July," Bet said. He nodded. He had his notebook in his pocket, but he did not take it out. Some things did not need to be written down to be preserved. "Sergeant Orville," Bates said. "How is he?" Clifton was quiet for a moment. "He signed the order for today himself," he said. "Came down to the supply room and signed it in person instead of sending Davis. I don't know why he did it that way." Bet looked up at the office window. Orville was there, a still figure in the pale light watching. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she raised her bowl, a small and simple gesture, one person acknowledging another across the compound. Orville did not move for a moment. Then he raised his coffee cup. That was all. It was enough. The journey home took 3 weeks. Shipped to Le Havre, then trains through France and into the occupied zones. They crossed into Germany on a gray March morning. Cities she had known as solid and permanent were gaps in rubble, familiar skylines replaced by open swampland. Stuttgart had survived better than most. Her mother opened the door within seconds of Beatty's knock and pulled her inside without a word, holding her with the grip of someone who has been practicing this moment for 9 months and does not intend to release it quickly. Her mother was thinner. Her hands were cold in a way that had less to do with the temperature than with insufficient food over a long period of time. But she was alive and the apartment was standing, and when Bet sat down across from her mother in the kitchen, she felt the particular gratitude of someone who had not been certain this moment would happen. "Were they terrible?" her mother asked, "the Americans?" Bet looked at her mother's face, at the lines that had deepened and the hollows that had not been there before, and thought about how to answer a question that simple with the truth that was not simple at all. "No," she said. "They followed the rules. They were careful with us." Her mother's shoulders dropped slightly, the release of a tension held for 9 months. "Good," I worried. "The things we were told during the war about how they treated prisoners." "Mama," Bade said, "everything was lies." The words were quiet and plain, and her mother received them quietly, looking at her across the table for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands, and when she looked up again, something had changed in her face. Something had gone through it and passed and left a new expression behind one that Bet recognized as the face of someone who has accepted a terrible thing and is now living on the other side of it. A week later, Bet stood in a queue for food ration cards. The line moved slowly. The woman in front of her complained to no one in particular, to the air to the general universe about the occupation forces taking everything and leaving Germans to starve, about the injustice of the defeated being made to suffer for the mistakes of their leaders. Bet said nothing. She thought about vanilla ice cream in February light, and about a sergeant who signed an order the morning he received the worst news of his life, and about a 22-year-old soldier who wrote down what he did not understand in a small notebook, because someone had told him that was how you started to understand things. She moved forward in the line as it moved and carried what she knew and waited for the day when she would know how to use it. That day came sooner than she expected. In the autumn of 1945, she was offered a teaching position at a gymnasium in Stuttgart. History and civics students aged 14 to 18, a generation that had grown up inside the lie and would spend the rest of their lives working out what that had cost them. She accepted. She spent 35 years in that classroom. She was a good teacher in the ways that matter, which is to say she did not give her students comfortable answers, and she did not pretend that the past was settled. She taught them the facts, and then she taught them to ask the questions the facts raised, and then she taught them to sit with the discomfort of questions that do not resolve cleanly, which is the hardest thing to teach and the most necessary. Once a year, always in July, always on a day when the heat in Stuttgart reached the particular oppressive stillness that reminded her of Louisiana, she stopped the regular lesson. She told them about a white cart in the sound of metal against metal and cold vapor rising in summer heat. She told them about a 19-year-old woman named Erna who cried because something was cold. She told them about a man named Orville who signed a paper the morning his world ended because he had decided long before that morning who he was going to be. She told them about a coffee cup raised in a window and about what that gesture contained. Her students were always quiet when she finished. Not the quiet of boredom, but the quiet of something received. The ice cream was not a kindness. She told them every year in the same words because some things need to be said exactly. It was a Tuesday, and the fact that it was simply Tuesday, that there was no occasion, required no special justification with administrative preamble. He opened the notebook to a specific page and turned it to face her. You can read that. She read it. Clifton's small, careful handwriting, his observations from July through October. She found her own entry quickly. Bet W did not cry. Eyes looking at something that wasn't there. And lower on the page, the question that was not really a question. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? She set the notebook down. Orville looked at her steadily. I lost my son at Okinawa, he said. June, I received notification in October. Bet was quiet. She had suspected something in the weeks since she had seen Clifton standing still in the compound, but she had not known the specifics. His name was James, Orville continued. He was 19 years old, the same age my brother was when he died at the Argonne. He said this without self-pity, the way you state a fact that you have looked at long enough that the looking no longer destroys you. I signed the ice cream distribution order the morning I received the telegram. Bet looked at him. I want to tell you why, he said. Because I've been carrying it for 3 months, and I think you are the only person in this camp who will understand it. She waited. When I was 17 years old in a trench at the Argonne, a soldier beside me gave a German prisoner a bar of chocolate. The prisoner cried. I did not understand it at the time. Orville turned his pen over in his hands, a slow rotation once, twice. I spent 27 years not understanding it. Then I read Clifton's notebook, and I understood it, and I understood something else as well, which is that the rules I have followed my entire career are not just rules. They are the answer to a question that every soldier has to answer for himself, which is what kind of man he is going to be when no one is requiring him to be anything in particular. Bet did not speak. She was listening with the focused attention of someone who knows they are hearing something they will need to remember. I signed the ice cream order the morning I lost James because I want to believe that wherever my son was held, the man in charge of that place was also the kind of man who signed the order. Not because the rules required it, because he had decided at some point before the crisis arrived who he was going to be. The office was completely quiet. Beth thought about what she wanted to say and discarded several versions of it. Then she said the true thing. My brother's name was Frederick. He was 20 when he died. She paused. I have been in this camp for 9 months, Sergeant Orville. I arrived believing that correctness was a performance, that the food and the provisions and the rules were a demonstration for the international community and would stop the moment observation stopped. She looked at him directly. I was wrong, and I know I was wrong not because of any argument. I know it because of ice cream on a Thursday. Orville was quiet for a moment. Then Clifton asked a question in his notebook. He asked why ice cream does what an interrogation never could. What is the answer? Because an interrogation tells a person what you want from them, Orville said. Ice cream tells them who you are. Bet sat with that. It was the most precise thing she had heard anyone say about the last 9 months. She stood to leave. At the door, she stopped, and the question came out before she had decided to ask it. Sergeant Orville, after everything, why did you still sign the order that morning? He looked at her. Because James was somewhere in the Pacific, and I wanted the universe to be the kind of place where someone signed that order for him too. Even if it didn't happen, even if it was too late. He paused. Especially if it was too late. Bet nodded once and walked back across the compound. The winter light was thin and pale. The pine trees beyond the fence were dark and still. She breathed the cold air and felt something settle in her, some long-held tension beginning to release. Not because anything had been resolved, but because she had finally, after 9 months, found the right frame for what she was living through. February came, and with it, the orders for repatriation. Bet's group was scheduled for transport in the second week of the month. The news moved through Block B with the complex emotional weather of something long-anticipated relief and grief, and the particular anxiety of people who have adjusted to one form of existence and are now being asked to return to another that they are no longer sure they recognize. On the last day, the ice cream cart came one final time. Clifton pushed it through the gate at the same time he always had. For a moment, just the length of a breath, it was July again, and the cart was white against the summer heat, and none of them knew yet what the next 7 months would teach them. Then the moment passed, and it was February, and the light was thin, and they were going home. "Last call for ice cream before you go home, ladies," Clifton said in his careful, practiced German. His voice was steady. His eyes were not entirely steady. Betty chose vanilla. She understood now why Erna had defended it all those months ago. There was nothing to hide behind, nothing to explain or justify, just the clean, cold sweetness of a thing that was exactly what it was. She ate it slowly, standing in the February light, and let herself feel all of it, that it was ordinary. That is what told me everything I needed to know about what we had been fighting. Not weakness, not decadence, something that could afford to be ordinary about it. Then she would pause, and she would let them sit with it. Bet Webb taught her last class in the spring of 1989. She retired in June, healthy enough, but tired in the way of someone who has done the work they came to do and is ready to put it down. She died in October of that year, quietly in the apartment on Lindenstrasse that her mother had held on to through everything. She did not live to see the 9th of November, 1989, when the wall that had divided her city and her country and her century finally came down. She missed it by 6 weeks. In her will, she left her diary to the Stuttgart City Archives. It is there now in a temperature-controlled storage room with other documents of the period fragile pages in a protective sleeve. Archivists handle it with cotton gloves. The entry for July 28, 1945 has a small drawing in the margin. A pencil sketch, rough and quick, of an ice cream cone. The cone is outlined in pencil, and the scoop above it is shaded pink, the color uneven, where the pencil pressed harder, in some places than others. The work of someone drawing not for an audience, but for themselves, trying to hold on to something before it dissolved, the way ice cream dissolves in Louisiana heat. Below the drawing and the careful handwriting that archivists and historians have come to recognize, one sentence. Today I learned what losing really means. What none of the archivists know, because it is not in any document they have found, is that somewhere in Ohio, in a house in a town whose name does not appear in any history of the war, an old soldier named Orville kept a small notebook on a shelf above his desk until the end of his life. He had not written it. A young private named Clifton had written it during the summer of 1945 at a camp in northern Louisiana and had given it to Orville on the day the camp closed. Orville had kept it for 40 years. He read it sometimes, not often, on nights when sleep did not come easily, which were more nights than he admitted to anyone. He never knew that on the other side of an ocean, a woman was telling students about vanilla ice cream and February light and a coffee cup raised in a window. He never knew that she had thought of him specifically in the years since, or that she had told his story unnamed every July in a classroom in Stuttgart, or that his son James had been preserved in the telling. Some connections are not made in the world. They exist anyway. That is the thing about small acts performed with full conviction in moments when no one is watching and nothing is required. They do not need to be witnessed to be real. They do not need to be remembered by the right people to have mattered. An ice cream cart on a Tuesday in July. Cold vapor in summer heat. A man signing an order the morning his heart broke because that was who he had decided to be. These things happened. They were enough.